Welcome to the Chapter 3 summary of Butler's DMT Field Guide. The title of this chapter is Let's Take a Trip, What a DMT Session Feels Like and How to Prepare for It. I begin the chapter by suggesting that in order to get the full benefits of DMT, that you smoke both DMT crystals as well as ingest or drink DMT brew or ayahuasca. The experiences of both are going to be very different, and each one has its place depending on what your intentions are. I next get into the basics, how to prepare for a DMT session. And honestly, this applies for any psychedelic session. I discuss the importance of environment and intention. Now, what is the best setup for you is going to be subjective and personal. And this will change depending on why you're using DMT, whether you're microdosing or looking to have a full blast off. Now, what is the perfect setting or environment? Again, it's going to be subjective, but there are some basic things that you're going to want to address. First off, temperature. Make sure that you're not too hot or too cold. Typically with psychedelics, everything's going to get amplified and all of your senses will be dialed up. If it's too hot or too cold, it'll be really fucking hot or really fucking cold really quick. Second, figure out if you want to either sit on the floor, sit in a bed, or have a seat set up. As soon as DMT starts taking over, you're going to want a safe place just to let go and relax. And you definitely want to have this all set up before you start using DMT. Third, do you want to experience DMT in the light or in the darkness? Do you want to have fun and cool shit to look at, like Alex Grey paintings or tapestries? Or do you want to sit in darkness with your eyes closed and just explore what your mind produces? Both can be extremely fun, and again, it depends on what you're looking for. The fourth suggestion is, do you want sound or do you want quiet? Again, similar to light or dark, this will change depending on what your intention is. It can be fun to listen to psychedelic music, or listen to your favorite band, or just listen to nature. But it can be equally satisfying just to sit in the quiet, put your hands over your ears, and just see what your mind produces. The last thing I talk about is textures. It's always nice to have something to hold on to rub, to touch. So whether that be a plush blanket, your favorite rubbing stone, a piece of silk, you are going to want something to touch, and it helps to have that handy. After your environment is set up, it's time to address the intention. And in my opinion, this is as important, if not more important, than having the right environment. Again, this is going to be subjective for everybody, but you want to make sure that you're not in a pissed off mood, that you're not aggressive. Make sure that you approach it with respect and reverence, and ideally be in a positive mindset. Once you've taken the time and energy to address the environment and intention, then the next thing to figure out is the dose. And the biggest factor in that is whether you want to microdose or go for a full blast and do a full session. I begin by talking about DMT brew, or more commonly known as ayahuasca. But I mentioned DMT brew because ayahuasca is specifically 2 ingredients, and I mentioned in my book several recipes that use other ingredients to make a DMT brew that can be either ingested by putting into brownies or smoothies, or drinking as a liquid. The dose for each person is going to be different depending on how big the person is, their body mass. Obviously somebody that weighs 150 pounds is going to have a different tolerance than somebody that weighs 300 pounds. It will depend on if you've been fasting, how much you've eaten, do you have a full stomach, is this your first time ingesting DMT, are you on any medication like SSRIs that may affect how your body metabolizes the DMT brew. This is all stuff that honestly you have to figure out over time. And I liken it to drinking alcohol, where it's similar to if you take one shot or if you drink an entire bottle, obviously you're going to have a very different experience. If I was planning to microdose, I would typically take about a shot, maybe a little bit more. Sometimes I would just take it straight up or mix it in my coffee. If I wanted to prolong that, I would do that, a couple shots over time. If I wanted to have a full-blown DMT brew session, that's when I would typically drink about a cup or 2 of the brew within a 30-minute period. But again, this is just guidelines, and each brew that you make is going to have a different strength. Maybe similar to like moonshine, where you don't know if it's going to be 70 proof or 130 proof. You don't know how strong the ayahuasca is or the DMT brew is, honestly, until you try it. This would probably be a good time to bring up throwing up. A lot of people talk about purging when they do ayahuasca retreats or drink DMT brew, where you're puking or shitting yourself. This can happen. It does happen. It doesn't necessarily have to happen. If you don't throw up, does that mean you didn't drink enough? No. Do you always have to throw up? No. If you do throw up, is that a bad thing? No. In my opinion, the ideal scenario is you can figure out a way that works best for you, where you're not necessarily purging violently, but you're also getting maximum benefit. If you have taken a full dose of DMT brew, or smoked an appropriate amount of DMT to have a full-blown session, one of 3 categories of trips will happen. Again, this is going to be subjective for everybody, but my experience is either 1, once you get into that elevated and altered DMT space, you simply sit back and enjoy the show. It's like you're in a 3D IMAX. All of your senses are completely dialed up. You have new sensory inputs, and you just enjoy the environment that you've set up. You try to work through the intentions that you've set, and it's really just like you're welcomed into a new space, a new environment, a new dimension, and you're exploring that space. The other option is, once you go into that space, you realize that you have the ability to ask questions, that your subconscious projects itself unfiltered, that you're having interactions with intelligence, source, God, whatever you want to call it, but you're clearly tapped into something different, something higher, and you have the ability to communicate back and forth. One of the most profound experiences is when you realize what you're communicating is you, and it's profoundly you. It's your subconscious, it's your psyche, it's your soul, it's your divine connection. There's a bunch of different ways to describe it, but you connect with yourself at a higher level. This allows for profound insight, it allows for the shadow work that needs to happen, and this is where the real magic of therapeutic value and helping with mental health issues can come in. The third option is you go into this space, you realize that you are connecting with something higher than yourself, that you are tapped into this universal field of energy, but what's communicating back with you is distinctly not you. And this is where shit can get kind of weird. So what is that connecting back with you? Is it DMT entities? Is it angels? Is it aliens? I try to describe accurately what these interactions are, but again, as equally profound, if not more, than realizing that you're talking to your higher self is to realize that there are other higher entities or other higher beings that also have the ability to communicate with you. Now, as far as what the proper dosage of smoking DMT is, again, this depends on what your intention is. Are you trying to microdose and clean the house on a Sunday afternoon? Or are you trying to ask existential questions like, who the fuck am I? And go deep into your shadow? As far as how do you smoke DMT, you have a couple options. You can use just a regular marijuana pipe where you can put a little bit of marijuana on the bottom or any type of herb and use that as a screen and then put your DMT on top. Otherwise, it'll just suck through and it basically turns like a wax. So you need to have something that'll prevent it from going all the way through. Or you can make your own cartridge, a regular 510 thread cartridge that you can get at any smoke or vape shop. You can either buy them empty or you can recycle them. You can fill those with the crystals and then melt them and use those normally as you would in any other battery. Or they make specific rigs and types of bowls at head shops that are used specifically for crystals. Those work as well. The vape cartridges are probably the easiest if you're looking to microdose. Maybe if it's your first experience and you're just trying to get familiar with the sensations, the cartridges or vape pens certainly will work for you. I personally like using just a regular pipe with some weed underneath it because that way you can really take big rips. And if your intention is to really blast off, the ability to take a full blast and rip is really important, especially on that first hit. As far as amount, I typically don't weigh it. I just kind of eyeball it. And I use the analogy of using either BBs or the size of peppercorns. So a normal to small session would be 2 or 3 BBs worth. A bigger session where you're really trying to blast off, I typically put about 4 or 5 BBs worth and really try to take as big a hits as I can the first 3 or 4 hits. Again, typically if you're looking to microdose, one hit will produce some pleasant sensations. If you're really looking to blast off, you want to try to take 4 hits, 5. If you can push it to 6 or 7, that's when you can really explore the farther ends of the DMT realms. I also mentioned in this chapter that first day that I tried DMT, and I go over a couple points about my first day smoking DMT. I mentioned how I had a friend that set up the perfect space for me. He knew what a dark place I was in and how my mental health was really in shambles. I mentioned that first day how I took about 50 hits, and I also say how before you call bullshit, let me break that down. So I did about 7 sessions that day within an hour and a half, and that's one of the beauties of smoking DMT is that it only lasts less than 10 minutes, typically 6, 7, 8 minutes, and then you're able to come back, integrate what you've learned, and then push it again. So again, that day that I was smoking DMT for the first time, it was after quite a bit of research, and I was really looking to have some profound answers to my issues. So the first session, I mentioned the first hit I took, it just instantly felt innate, it felt natural, it felt familiar. Instantly it makes all of your sights and sounds go crazy, and clearly you just smoked a very powerful psychedelic. but it felt as though the veil was removed. It didn't feel like I was poisoned or that my senses were being clouded. Just the opposite. It felt as though I was being exposed to reality, that I was having more sensory inputs. It also felt very familiar from when I was a child. There was this weird nasal sensation in the back of your throat that was just very familiar. So that first session, I took that first hit, felt comfortable. I took another couple hits, and I was using a vape rig pen. That first session, I just sat back and enjoyed. There were no interactions, there were no entities, I didn't have any profound insights. I just felt comfortable being in that DMT psychedelic space. But I pushed it a little bit further the second session. Again, profound sensory overload and a really enjoyable experience, but no insights, no communication. Pushed it a little bit further, again, push it a little bit further. I did that for about 6 sessions. At this point, my mind was starting to get pretty well fried, but I still hadn't had any epiphanies. I hadn't had any communications. And honestly, at that point in my life, if I didn't get any answers, I was going to walk off into the woods and not come back. So that last session, I really asked for help from the universe. I took 7, 8 big hits, and that last session is when everything changed. All of the sights and sounds stopped, all of the vibratory hums stopped, and I instantly just got this informational download, this input from some type of energy or source. At that point, it put all of my problems into perspective and allowed me to shine a spotlight on myself and on my issues for the first time in my adult life. That day, certainly my life wasn't fixed, but it allowed me to shine a spotlight on my problems and on myself in a true and accurate way, in an authentic way that I hadn't been doing in the past. After that last session of that day, about an hour and a half from my first hit, I was in a crumpled mess on my friend's floor, just with crying with tears of gratitude, realizing that I could now finally move forward in my life. Since that day, I've done DMT hundreds of times. I've used it as part of my holistic well-being lifestyle. I've used it to help with my creative endeavors, with my relationships, and those experiences have changed quite a bit, and I will get into those later on in the book. I end the chapter going over the importance of inducing your own endogenous DMT. Again, endogenous meaning that produced naturally in your own body. I talk about how gratifying producing DMT by yourself, inside yourself, can be. Through breathing exercises and through deep meditation, you can get your body to produce elevated amounts of DMT, and you do feel it. It may not be as sensorily stimulating, and you may not have a full-blown DMT experience, but the natural and endogenous DMT that you do produce will certainly elevate your consciousness. It'll connect you to source in a way that is even more satisfying than experiencing DMT exogenously. Another important aspect of the breathing exercises or deep meditation with the intent of inducing DMT is simply that you take time for yourself. It's really important today, especially today, to take the time for yourself, to know that you're worthy of an hour or 2 or 3 or a weekend or a week to take the time to meditate, to breathe, and connect with yourself. And when you do that and connect with your own endogenous DMT, it's a very, very powerful experience.